The Golden State Killer, a legacy of fear. The Golden State Killer, also known as the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker, was a notorious criminal who terrorized California in the 1970s and 1980s. Over the course of a decade, he committed at least 13 murders, 50 rapes, and 120 burglaries, leaving a trail of fear and devastation in his wake. The early years, 1976 to 1979, the East Area Rapist. The Golden State Killer began his crime spree in the eastern neighborhoods of Sacramento, California, in the summer of 1976. His modus operandi was both chilling and calculated. He would stake out homes, learn the routines of his victims, and then strike when they were most vulnerable. His initial crimes involved breaking into homes late at night. Often, he would enter quietly, ensuring his presence went unnoticed until he revealed himself. Victims would awake to the sight of a masked intruder holding a flashlight and weapon. He targeted women living alone or with children initially, but his approach evolved to include couples, which intensified the horror of his attacks. The assailant was methodical. He would bind his victims with pre-cut ligatures, often using shoelaces, and separate them, usually placing the male partner face down in another room while assaulting the female. Adding to the horror, he would sometimes take breaks during the attacks to rummage through the house, eat food, or make eerie comments about his power over his victims. 1979 to 1986, the original Night Stalker. After committing over 50 rapes in Northern California, the attacker shifted his focus. His crimes became deadlier, earning him a new moniker, the original Night Stalker. Moving to Southern California, he escalated to murder, brutally killing couples in their homes. One of his most infamous attacks occurred in Ventura in 1980 when he murdered Lyman and Charlene Smith. The brutality of the killings shocked investigators, and the use of a log to bludgeon the victims to death underscored his increasing violence. DNA from these crime scenes later proved to be crucial in linking the East Area Rapist to the original Night Stalker. By 1986, the attack stopped abruptly. The abrupt cessation led many to speculate that the killer had died, been imprisoned for another crime, or simply moved elsewhere. His sudden disappearance left investigators and the public with more questions than answers. The investigation, a daunting task. The investigation into the Golden State Killer's crime spanned decades and was marked by both breakthroughs and frustrations. Despite his careful planning, the perpetrator left behind physical evidence, including semen samples, shoe prints, and detailed descriptions from survivors. However, without advanced forensic technology, these clues were insufficient to identify him. Challenges faced by law enforcement. The scope of the crimes. The killer's wide geographical range, from Sacramento to Ventura County, made it difficult to connect the dots initially. Separate jurisdictions were investigating the crimes independently, delaying the realization that they were dealing with a single individual. Psychological profiling. Profilers suggested that the attacker was likely a white male in his mid-20s to early 30s with military or police training, given his strategic approach. However, this profile applied to thousands, if not tens of thousands, of potential suspects. Media involvement. The media played a dual role in the case. Publicity about the attacks heightened awareness but also emboldened the killer. In one infamous instance, after a television segment featured a man claiming he was not afraid of the East Area Rapist, his home became the next target. The cold case era. By the 1990s, advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to confirm that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same person. However, the killer's DNA did not match any samples in national criminal databases, leaving the case cold once again. The case haunted investigators like Paul Holes, who dedicated years of his career to identifying the Golden State Killer. Holes was instrumental in keeping the investigation alive, ensuring that the evidence collected would someday lead to a resolution. The breakthrough, the power of genetic genealogy. The breakthrough in the case came in 2018, thanks to an innovative technique called genetic genealogy. This method involves analyzing DNA evidence and comparing it to profiles in public genealogy databases to identify relatives of an unknown suspect. The role of unmask investigators uploaded the killer's DNA profile to unmask, a public database used by genealogy enthusiasts to trace their family history. By identifying distant relatives who shared segments of DNA with the perpetrator, they constructed a family tree. The process was painstaking, requiring cross-referencing birth and death records, marriage certificates, and other public documents. The discovery of Joseph James DeAngelo. After narrowing down the possibilities, investigators identified Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer, as the prime suspect. DeAngelo's past fit the profile. He had served as a police officer in the 1970s and was fired for shoplifting, a clue to his deviant tendencies. His time in law enforcement explained his knowledge of investigative techniques, which likely helped him evade capture. In April 2018, law enforcement collected a discarded DNA sample from DeAngelo, reportedly from items like a tissue or a piece of trash. The results confirmed what they had suspected. DeAngelo's DNA was a match to the evidence collected from multiple crime scenes. The arrest and confession. The arrest of Joseph James DeAngelo on April 24, 2018, was a moment of vindication for survivors and investigators alike. By this time, DeAngelo was a 72-year-old retiree living quietly in a suburban neighborhood. His neighbors described him as a recluse who showed occasional outbursts of anger but gave no indication of his dark past. DeAngelo's double life. DeAngelo's arrest revealed the shocking duality of his existence. While committing unspeakable crimes, he maintained a semblance of normalcy, marrying and raising children. His ability to blend into society while committing such atrocities added a new layer of horror to his story. During interrogations, DeAngelo offered a bizarre explanation for his actions, claiming an inner voice named Jerry compelled him to kill. This attempt to shift blame did little to sway investigators or the public, who viewed it as a manipulative ploy. Justice served. The trial and sentencing. In June 2020, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 murders and numerous other charges. His plea deal spared him the death penalty but ensured he would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. Impact on victims and families. The courtroom became a place of catharsis for many survivors and the families of victims. Over several days, they shared heart-wrenching impact statements, recounting the trauma they endured and the lives forever changed by DeAngelo's actions. One survivor stated, "You left a legacy of fear, but today, we reclaim our power." DeAngelo, frail and confined to a wheelchair, offered a brief apology, saying, "I've listened to all your statements. I'm truly sorry to everyone I've hurt." His apology, however, was met with skepticism and anger from many. The legacy of the case. The Golden State Killer case has left an indelible mark on law enforcement, forensic science, and the broader fight for justice. It demonstrated the power of genetic genealogy as a tool for solving cold cases and inspired renewed efforts to bring other unsolved crimes to closure. The case also sparked debates about privacy, as the use of public DNA databases raised questions about consent and the ethical implications of forensic investigations. Conclusion: A Monster Unmasked. The story of the Golden State Killer is one of terror, persistence, and ultimately, justice. For decades, he evaded capture, hiding in plain sight while his victims lived in fear. But through the tireless efforts of investigators and the transformative power of modern science, his reign of terror was finally brought to an end. His capture serves as a testament to the resilience of those who refuse to let evil prevail and a reminder that no matter how long it takes, justice is worth pursuing.